Good afternoon, everybody. Last week, we began our adult formation course, I Have My Mission, or continued it rather, and thinking about what we call the great questions of life. And the former Superior General of the Jesuits, Father Adolfo Nicolas, commented on these. He said, "All great civilizations have wrestled with the fundamental questions. What does it mean to be human? Wherein lies our happiness? Does our universe have an ultimate destiny, or will it drift into meaningless extinction? Ceaseless communication, endless texting tend to suppress the exploration of such questions in depth." Over 50 years ago, the authors of the Dutch Catechism put it in a similar way. The young father whose children are asleep upstairs while he relaxes in the company of his wife after the strain of the day puts the question differently from the man who is hated and abandoned by his children and whose life is, humanly speaking, a failure. The undergraduate on an evening's discussion sees the question mark from a different angle than the workman waiting for the bus in the morning air. The woman suffering in hospital puts the question differently from the woman sunning herself on a beach. The religious-minded man puts it differently from the man whose tastes are more worldly. The unbeliever puts it differently from the believer, and the man who tries to follow his conscience from one who does not. The question sounded differently in the 19th century, but in the 20th and now the 21st, it is still the same enigma, which man is always asked to solve. Not a game which one can stand aside from, but the question of each man's happiness and his aim in life, and whether life itself has a goal. So, what about us here in Britain in the 21st century? What's happened to us? What affects us? What determines how we might ask this question, if indeed we ask it at all? There are a number of factors that we can isolate here. Firstly, an increase in uncertainty. Who can I trust? Who can I believe? Who is telling me the truth about our situation? What is truth anyway? Look at the development of what was called fake news and alternative facts in the United States. It's incredible that you could have alternative facts that aren't the truth at all, but people are expected to accept them. We do not like what we do not know, and we don't ask questions that cannot be answered. A lack of knowledge about anything is almost obscene to us. And if you remember in the early days of the pandemic, that the anger that it caused, because nobody knew what it was, because it was literally unprecedented. The questions couldn't be answered. And there was this huge anger and demand. We need these questions answering. We need to know what this is going to do. But nobody knew, and that was what people couldn't cope with. And as a consequence of this, there is a sort of insecurity that comes to us. How can I plan for my future? What sort of job will I have? What career can my children hope for? Can I have any hopes at all? If my work in life is to be a series of short-term contracts, how can I see a way ahead? How can I plan anything? Insurance brokers make a fortune out of offering us security for our future when it often can't happen. Markets collapse, pension schemes disappear, or are criminally taken from us. And despite all the unctuous promises that are made in TV and media adverts, nothing is certain. When we think about it, it makes us cautious and sometimes even afraid. And thirdly, a sense of worthlessness. Many people are finding themselves seeking early retirement to get away from the stresses of working life and all that this means. Often they're being made redundant too early and feeling that their working life, and consequently they themselves, are of little use to anyone. Elderly people are being made to feel a drain on resources by the media and health service, a service that they helped to create in the first place. It seems that the value of many persons now being measured solely by their cost effectiveness. And the prospect of assisted suicide is looming large on our horizons as a way of solving a problem where the quality of life, as it's called, of many people, is being dictated by and decided by other people. And the implications of that behaviour and its thinking are truly frightening. Fourthly, others, overtaken by the expectations of their working life, the constant appraisals to which they are now subject, have become competitive, arrogant, and even demanding in order to keep their place. Your colleague has now become your rival. And people are much more materialistic, with, it seems, a great need to achieve what they want. Ambition and competition seems to have taken over, and people seem to have been overwhelmed by it. They do not seem to be thinking about the meaning of what they're doing and where it might lead in the future. It's as if making money is more important than having money, which seems rather strange, but that's the way it seems to strike me. In school, passing exams is often presented as the goal of our school life, rather than becoming a balanced, decent person. We become less trusting and don't even look each other in the eyes. This is often spilled over into other areas of our lives, family, spirituality, with disastrous consequences, not least in the unwillingness to recognize personal fault and responsibility and, of course, apologize. Failure is not on the horizon and cannot be contemplated. The only place we are now allowed to fail, as Father Brian is often wont to say, is in the confessional. Then there is tragedy and unfairness. For many, illness has taken away a member of their family, possibly through COVID-19, or there will have been some affliction or difficulty that has befallen them unmerited. They cannot live easily with this form of tragedy. They want to blame someone and can't find anybody. And this is one of the reasons why so many people say they can no longer believe in God, because he's so unfair in allowing these terrible things to happen to us and around us. So a blame culture is everywhere. Then there is isolation and loneliness. Many people live alone with no community to support them and only the TV and social media to keep them amused. They feel they're of no use to anyone, even though they've made many virtual friends on social media. And there is fear. You're afraid even to go out for a walk in the park, for fear that something awful might happen to you, as it has to lots of other people. If people are in trouble, often bystanders will just walk away and don't want to know in case they might get involved. The isolation is compounded by the development of online shopping, which is the fastest growing industry in the country. Look at the plethora of the new cathedrals of commerce, large warehouses that are constantly being built on the outskirts of towns and cities, particularly round here, where we are conveniently situated in the middle of England. Why bother going to a shop when you might have to meet people and talk to them, when a phone call or an email to Amazon will do the trick and your food can be delivered at 10 o'clock at night? Then there is the need for excitement and stimulation to escape the drudgery and ordinariness of life. This has led some people to have a huge fascination and involvement with the virtual world of social media, yes, and even the drug culture, or into all sorts of bizarre and unhelpful behavior. The invention and growth of Facebook and other social media sites could not have been imagined 20 years ago, but now it is part and parcel of everyday life for so many people, and something they find themselves turning to automatically as soon as they come in for work, or even during breaks in their working day. And their appetite for it has become voracious and all-consuming. Do others really care if you're still in your pajamas at midday and want to tell everybody else? Is your life so interesting that you can't wait to share it and all its minutiae with thousands of others via Facebook or Twitter? Apparently so. The founder of Facebook is now worth a staggering $7 billion and is the world's richest man. As a society, we've become very much more victims of market forces, which continually offer us opportunities or products that will take away our misery, provide us with the prospect of great wealth and thereby happiness, and draw us inexorably into their web of consumerism. The L'Oreal advert, which I've spoken to you about many times, "Because you're worth it," has defined so much of our lives that we don't even realize, and place the individual at the very center of their own needs and interests, thus isolating them from others and our Lord in particular. There is, of course, a commercial need for self-interest in that the economy is based on retail spending. So many jobs and lives depend on people spending, not only to feed themselves, but especially to pamper themselves. Look at the rise in the number of hairdressers, beauty parlours, nail bars, and dare I say it, even tattoo shops in ours and any town. The only businesses to flourish as the shops around are closing down. What we used to call a stag night or a hen night, for example, is no longer a meal and a drink with a few friends, but now seems invariably to involve a trip to Spain or some adventure in a faraway place involving strenuous activity. I spent my stag night with Father David Everett in Mount St Bernard Abbey, by the way. Sport is often a vehicle of our excitement, and football in particular has become what Karl Marx used to refer to religion as, namely the opium of the people. Why do you think that the football authorities went to such trouble to put on matches during the pandemic with no one there? Someone was there, television. All this provided us with a distraction from the horror that was going on around us, and was, at least in that respect, a good thing. Then there were the Euros, great excitement, followed by nasty blame and racial messaging. Now it's back after a 3-week gap, which was very conveniently filled by the Olympics, so everything will be all right, isn't it? A very nice gentleman took Father Michael and I to see Coventry City on Sunday. I've not been to a football match for years. And I sat there and took it all in. The noise of the crowd, the sheer elation, when the team scored and so on. And I thought to myself, this is something that a lot of people really depend on for their excitement and so on. And in some respects, I can understand that. In others, I thought it was a bit sad. Finally, we are now discovering that we are in a highly risk-averse, antiseptic society with its stifling multiplication of health and safety regulations and its fear of life. Sometimes we feel that we are constantly being controlled and trapped by outside forces and submerged in bureaucracy. So what does all this mean? What does it mean for me? Are we looking for a situation in which there is no suffering, no hardship, no injustice, equal rights and peace, prosperity and happiness for all? Is religion and the affiliation to it the answer to these questions? Will it provide the ultimate comfort and reassurance we crave? Not necessarily. Maybe we're looking in the wrong place. If my need is paramount in my believing, I will not commit myself to anything or anyone else. The truth is that the I or me is what is at the centre of my existence, and this situation is overtaking us without our really noticing it. In this climate, whatever I want, I should have, even if it is at the expense of others. So when was the last time you asked yourself why your clothes are so cheap? Answer: because they've been made in a sweatshop by people working in the most appalling conditions for minuscule remuneration. I have to be successful, or it's other people's fault. I have to be healthy, or the medical professionals are to blame. Whatever I think is right and always will be right, despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary. This is what Pope Benedict used to call moral relativism. One man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. Frequently, both of them exist in the same person in certain parts of the world at the moment. With the rise of what we now call populism, namely people appealing to others' needs and opinions in a political theory that takes no account of anyone else. It promises to take away your fears, indulge your eccentricities, and the vilest levels of your consciousness, and is alive and well in many places: India, Brazil, Turkey, Hungary, Russia, and of course the USA. And there's more than a small argument indicating its existence here in the UK as well. At the bottom of a lot of this is the identification of us as what we used to call goodies, and the demonization of others as baddies in a hugely simplistic and yet effective way of controlling people's minds and turning them against others. It used to be cowboys and Indians, you'll remember, in the tradition of the Western films and TV. Have you ever thought what it must have been like to be designated as one of the Indians who always lost? This was the beginning of a form of racism or separation of people into different categories, which has now become far more obvious and prevalent. Now you will see it more subtly portrayed in films and TV, Rambo and Dirty Harry, and so many of the NCIS series to which I fall asleep in the chair most nights. There's always goodies and baddies, and the goodies always win. The mantra, for example, of Make America Great Again is a simplistic way of promoting jingoistic self-reference, usually at the expense of others, whom presumably we have to make less so that we can be great. The great in Great Britain, it could be argued, no longer exists, and certainly it is something that many other countries resent. Because we think we are great, this has allowed the emergence of popular movements such as the English Defence League and other far-right groups in our own country, and is very disturbing. It would appear that the BNP, the British National Party, has now faded away, but it seemed to morph respectably into UKIP, and now other bizarre political parties with their own specific agenda to poison our minds, which has nothing to do with the well-being of all people. If you think you know what injustice is, I suggest that you just ask Father Michael. He might enlighten you, he will enlighten you, if not frighten you, when he tells you the sort of things that are going on in his own country, Nigeria, and other places in Africa at the moment. The situation which has emerged only this week in Afghanistan and the behaviour of the Taliban there is truly dreadful, particularly as it's done in the name of religion. Personal opinion has now become paramount. Phone-ins, interactive broadcasting are one thing, and the increased use of the words rights is another. The internet has furthermore provided people with the opportunity to think that suddenly become experts on a wide variety of topics simply because they've read up on them on Google or something. And think finally of this week's report on climate destruction. We've known about it for a long time, but we've never faced up to it or our own part in bringing it about. They say that the Emperor Nero fiddled while Rome burned. We are preoccupying ourselves in cultivated introspection while the world is literally burning all around us. Remember the parable about Dives and Lazarus in the Gospel. The rich man couldn't even see the poor man at his door. We've blinded ourselves willfully to the suffering of others, the injustices taking place in all parts of the world, and lost our sense of what justice is altogether. Many of our children have now become part of what we call Generation Snowflake, pampered, indulged, and never in the wrong. My brother was a head teacher for many years, and some years ago he suspended his boy for swearing at teachers and bullying people on the bus. He was 13, and his father didn't like it, because he thought, this isn't my son. So he came and he said to my brother, he said, Mr. Daly, he said, you need to know that my son will give his teachers respect when they've earned it. And my brother said, excuse me, it's the other way around here. There are even more bizarre episodes in a school in Derby where this young lad was putting the head of a young, newly arrived student down the toilet. He was filmed doing it and got suspended. So his father came along and the head teacher showed him the film. And he said, this isn't my son, when it clearly was. And the most absurd of all took place in Ireland, in Cork, about 3 years ago, when a mother took to court the coach of her son's football team for not picking him in the team. And this was post-traumatic disorder that the son had suffered because he wasn't picked. And so she decided to sue the coach. Now, all of that is bordering on the absurd. It is truly madness at its most extreme. So what I've tried to give you here is something of an overview that what has become of the I in I believe in God. It's not meant to be a cynical, pessimistic view of the world. which can then be seen as needing religion or faith, nor does it hide from the fact that there are countless people living quiet, loving, and yes, holy lives all around us who seem to be untouched or unmoved by the less salutary aspects of our humanity. Much of both of these elements is present in you and me. So we've spoken a little bit about God, and now a little bit about I, and next week we'll reflect on what we mean by believe, and thus whether a belief in God is still possible and desirable in the context in which we now live.